The mountain wind howled across the training grounds of the 47th Special Forces Division as Sarah Chen adjusted her rifle scope for the third time that morning. At 26, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, her slight frame often causing visiting officials to mistake her for a communications officer rather than one of the military's most promising marksmen. Today was different, though. Today, General Marcus Blackwood, a decorated veteran of 3 conflicts and known for his old-school military values, had arrived to evaluate the unit's capabilities. Sarah had heard the whispers before the general's convoy even reached the base. Word traveled fast in military circles, and General Blackwood's reputation preceded him. He believed in traditional warfare, heavy artillery, and experienced male soldiers who had proven themselves in desert combat. The idea of precision shooting by anyone other than battle-hardened snipers with years of field experience seemed to amuse him greatly. As the general stepped out of his armored vehicle, his aide pointed toward the shooting range where Sarah was conducting her morning practice. The general's weathered face, marked by decades of sun and stress, showed clear skepticism as he watched her through his binoculars. She was hitting targets at 800 meters with mechanical precision, each shot finding its mark in the center ring. But instead of admiration, his expression showed something closer to dismissal. "That's your top marksman?" General Blackwood asked Colonel Rivera, the base commander, with barely concealed amusement. "She looks like she should be handling paperwork." "Not a Barrett rifle." Colonel Rivera, who had worked with Sarah for 2 years and witnessed her exceptional abilities firsthand, chose his words carefully. "Sir, Sergeant Chen has consistently outperformed every shooter in this division. Her accuracy rates are unlike anything I've seen in my 20-year career." The general chuckled, a sound that carried across the range and reached Sarah's ears. She continued her shooting routine, but her jaw tightened slightly. She had faced this kind of doubt her entire military career, from the moment she first picked up a rifle during basic training in Colorado. Growing up in rural Montana, Sarah had learned to shoot from her grandfather, a Korean War veteran who taught her that shooting was 90% mental discipline and 10% physical technique. While other kids played video games, she spent hours in the Montana wilderness, learning to read wind patterns, calculating bullet drop, and developing the patience that would later define her military career. Her grandfather had always told her that true marksmanship wasn't about strength or aggression. It was about understanding physics, controlling breathing, and maintaining absolute focus even when everything around you was chaos. These lessons had served her well through military training, where she quickly distinguished herself despite instructors who initially questioned whether someone her size could handle the recoil of military-grade rifles. The general approached the shooting line, his boots crunching on the gravel. Sarah completed her current series of shots before standing and saluting properly. Up close, General Blackwood looked even more imposing, his chest decorated with ribbons and medals from conflicts she had only read about in military history books. "Sergeant Chen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "I've been watching your performance this morning." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, maintaining perfect military bearing despite knowing that his tone suggested he wasn't particularly impressed. 800 meters, he continued, glancing toward the targets downrange. "Decent shooting for training purposes, but tell me, Sergeant, how do you think your skills would translate to real combat situations, when enemy fire is incoming, when your position is compromised, when lives depend on your ability to perform under pressure?" Sarah had faced this question many times before, but never from someone of General Blackwood's rank and influence. She knew that her answer could affect not only her own career, but potentially the opportunities available to other women in similar positions. "Sir, I believe that accurate shooting under stress requires the same fundamentals as accurate shooting under any circumstances," she replied. "Proper breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, and the ability to make rapid calculations for wind and distance remain constant regardless of the tactical situation. The general's aide, a young lieutenant who had been taking notes throughout the morning, stopped writing and looked up with interest. Several other soldiers had begun to gather around, sensing that this conversation was becoming something more than routine small talk. "Fundamentals," General Blackwood repeated, seeming to taste the word. "That's what they teach in sniper school, isn't it? But I've been in situations where fundamentals weren't enough, where you needed raw courage, physical strength, and the kind of killer instinct that can't be taught in any classroom." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable now. Sarah felt the weight of every eye on the range watching this exchange. She had worked too hard and come too far to let this moment slip away without standing her ground. "Sir, with respect, I believe that precision and accuracy can be more valuable than raw courage in many tactical situations," she said carefully. "A single well-placed shot can often accomplish what an entire platoon might struggle to achieve through conventional means." The general laughed again, but this time it was sharper, more pointed. "A single shot?" "Sergeant, I've seen enemy positions that required sustained artillery bombardment to neutralize. I've witnessed firefights where soldiers expended thousands of rounds to achieve their objectives. The idea that one person with one rifle could make a decisive difference in a major tactical situation is optimistic." Colonel Rivera shifted uncomfortably beside them. He knew Sarah's capabilities better than anyone, having seen her perform shooting demonstrations that left experienced snipers shaking their heads in amazement. But he also understood the delicate politics involved when a general officer expressed skepticism about one of his personnel. "Perhaps we could arrange a demonstration," the colonel suggested diplomatically. "Sergeant Chen could show you some of her more advanced shooting techniques." Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly. She had been hoping for exactly this opportunity, but now that it was potentially within reach, she felt the familiar pre-performance nerves that had affected her since childhood. Not fear exactly, but the heightened awareness that came with knowing she was about to be tested. General Blackwood considered the suggestion for a moment, his gray eyes studying Sarah with the calculating gaze of someone who had evaluated countless soldiers over the decades. Finally, he nodded. "Very well," he said, "but let's make this interesting. I don't want to see more 800-meter shots against stationary targets. If Sergeant Chen is truly as exceptional as you claim, Colonel, then she should be able to demonstrate capabilities that go beyond routine training exercises." The general paused, clearly formulating a challenge that would push Sarah's abilities to their limits. Around them, the morning training activities had come to a complete stop, as word spread that something significant was happening at the rifle range. "I want to see precision shooting at maximum effective range," General Blackwood announced. "Real tactical scenarios, moving targets, wind compensation, the kind of shooting that might actually matter in a combat environment." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was her chance to prove herself, but she also understood that failure here would likely close doors throughout her military career. The general wasn't just testing her shooting ability. He was challenging the entire concept of whether someone like her belonged in elite military positions. "What specific parameters did you have in mind, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice steady and professional. The general smiled, but it wasn't entirely friendly. "Let's start with something simple, Sergeant. Show me what you can do at 1,500 meters. If that goes well, we'll discuss more challenging distances." 1,500 meters was nearly a mile, well beyond what most soldiers considered reasonable for individual rifle shots. Sarah had trained at that distance before, but always under perfect conditions with extensive preparation time. Attempting it in front of a skeptical general, with her career potentially hanging in the balance, would be entirely different. As the range was being prepared for the extended distance shooting, Sarah began her mental preparation routine. She thought about her grandfather's lessons, about countless hours of practice, about every principle of marksmanship she had ever learned. She also thought about the women who might follow in her footsteps, and how today's performance could affect their opportunities. The wind was picking up, and dark clouds were beginning to gather on the horizon, weather conditions that would make precision shooting significantly more challenging. But Sarah had trained in all kinds of weather, and she knew that real tactical situations rarely offered perfect conditions. As she began checking her equipment and calculating the ballistic requirements for the upcoming shot, she caught sight of General Blackwood speaking quietly with his aide. Whatever he was saying, it was clear that he expected this demonstration to confirm his preconceptions about her limitations. Sarah smiled quietly to herself. The general was about to discover that some assumptions were worth reconsidering. The 1,500-meter range required a complete repositioning of equipment and personnel. Sarah watched as range safety officers used all-terrain vehicles to set up targets at the extreme distance, their vehicles appearing as tiny specks against the mountainous backdrop. The target itself would be barely visible to the naked eye, requiring complete reliance on optical equipment and mathematical precision. General Blackwood stood behind Sarah as she prepared her rifle, a customized M110 semi-automatic sniper system that she had personally modified over months of training. Every adjustment had been tested and refined until the weapon responded to her touch like a musical instrument responds to a skilled performer. 1,500 meters, the general mused aloud. That's beyond the effective range of most military rifles, Sergeant. Are you certain your equipment is capable of maintaining accuracy at that distance? Sarah finished adjusting her scope elevation and looked up. Sir, the rifle is capable. The question is whether the shooter can perform the necessary calculations and maintain proper form throughout the shot sequence. Colonel Rivera approached with meteorological readings from the base weather station. Wind speed was gusting between 12 and 18 miles per hour from the northwest, with shifting patterns that would require constant recalculation. Atmospheric pressure was dropping as the storm clouds gathered, affecting bullet trajectory in ways that most shooters never learned to account for. Atmospheric conditions are deteriorating, the colonel reported. Perhaps we should postpone this demonstration until weather conditions improve. General Blackwood shook his head firmly. Real combat doesn't wait for perfect weather, Colonel. If Sergeant Chen's abilities are as remarkable as you claim, she should be able to adapt to changing conditions. Sarah appreciated the challenge, though she understood the general's underlying message. He was systematically removing every advantage she might have, forcing her to demonstrate skill under the most difficult circumstances possible. In a way, this was exactly what she had trained for throughout her career. She began her wind-reading procedure, studying the grass and vegetation at various distances downrange. Wind patterns rarely remained consistent across the entire bullet flight path, and successful long-range shooting required understanding how air currents changed at different elevations and distances. This was part science, part art, and part intuition, developed through years of practice. The mathematical calculations alone were staggering. At 1,500 meters, bullet drop would exceed 30 feet from the point of aim. Wind drift could push the projectile several feet in either direction. Temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure would all affect bullet velocity and trajectory. Sarah ran through the calculations methodically, double-checking every variable. As she settled into her shooting position, a small crowd had gathered behind the firing line. Word had spread throughout the base that something extraordinary was happening, and off-duty personnel had begun arriving to witness the demonstration. Sarah tried to ignore the spectators, but she could feel the weight of their expectations and curiosity. "Take your time, Sergeant," General Blackwood said, though his tone suggested he expected her to fail, regardless of how much preparation she took. Sarah's breathing routine began automatically, the deep, measured respirations that would slow her heart rate and steady her nervous system. Through her scope, the target appeared as a small geometric shape, wavering slightly in the heat distortion rising from the valley floor. She made final adjustments to her scope settings and prepared for the shot. The trigger squeeze was smooth and deliberate, the rifle recoiling against her shoulder with familiar force. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's vapor trail arc across the landscape, a faint disturbance in the air that traced the projectile's path toward the target. The impact occurred exactly where she had aimed, the target sensors immediately confirming a center hit. Around her, the gathered soldiers erupted in appreciative murmurs, but General Blackwood remained silent for several seconds. "Impressive," he admitted finally. "But one successful shot doesn't necessarily indicate consistent performance. Would you mind attempting a few more shots at that distance?" Sarah nodded and began preparing for her second shot. The wind had shifted slightly, requiring new calculations and scope adjustments. This shot was equally successful, followed by a third and fourth that maintained the same precision. By the time she had fired 5 consecutive shots into the center of the 1,500-meter target, even General Blackwood's skeptical expression had begun to change. "Remarkable accuracy," he acknowledged. "However, I noticed that these targets are stationary, Sergeant. Real tactical situations rarely offer such cooperative targets." The range officer approached with a tablet displaying various target options. "Sir, we have motorized targets that can simulate movement patterns at extended distances." General Blackwood studied the available options before selecting a program that would move targets in unpredictable patterns at 1,200 meters. "Let's see how Sergeant Chen performs against moving targets." This challenge required an entirely different set of skills. Moving target engagement involved predicting where a target would be at the moment the bullet arrived, accounting for both the target's movement and the bullet's flight time. At 1,200 meters, the bullet would require nearly 2 seconds to reach its destination, during which time a moving target could travel significant distances. Sarah studied the target movement pattern for several minutes, identifying the timing intervals and speed variations that would allow her to predict target positions. Her first shot missed slightly, passing just behind the target as it changed direction unexpectedly. The second shot connected cleanly, followed by 3 more successful hits out of 5 attempts. 60% success rate against moving targets at 1,200 meters, General Blackwood observed. "Better than I expected, though hardly perfect." Colonel Rivera stepped forward diplomatically. "Sir, most military snipers consider 50% accuracy against moving targets at that distance to be exceptional performance." The general nodded thoughtfully, but Sarah could see that he was already formulating his next challenge. She was beginning to understand that no level of performance would completely satisfy his skepticism. He seemed determined to find her limits, to discover the point at which her abilities would finally prove inadequate. "Tell me, Sergeant," the general said, "what's the maximum effective range at which you've successfully engaged targets?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sir, I've successfully hit stationary targets at 2,000 meters during training exercises. However, those shots required ideal conditions and extensive preparation time." 2,000 meters, the general repeated. "That's beginning to approach the realm of true long-range precision shooting. But I'm curious about something, Sergeant. In all your training and experience, have you ever attempted shots beyond that distance?" The question struck Sarah as oddly specific. Most military operations never required shooting beyond 1,500 meters, making the general's interest in extreme long-range capabilities somewhat unusual. She wondered if he had something particular in mind. "Sir, I've studied the ballistics and theoretical requirements for shots beyond 2,000 meters, she replied. "The mathematical principles remain the same, though the margin for error becomes extremely small. Weather conditions become critical factors, and equipment limitations become more significant." General Blackwood exchanged a meaningful look with his aide, who immediately began making notes in his tablet. Sarah noticed that the aide seemed to be recording much more detailed information than would typically be required for a routine base inspection. "Sergeant Chen," the general said slowly, "I'm going to share something with you that's currently classified information. 3 days ago, intelligence sources confirmed the location of a high-value target in a mountainous region approximately 4,000 meters from our nearest observation post. Traditional artillery cannot reach that position due to intervening terrain, and air support is unavailable due to enemy air defense systems." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. 4,000 meters was nearly 2.5 miles, well beyond anything she had ever attempted. At that distance, bullet drop would exceed 100 feet, and flight time would approach 6 seconds. Environmental factors would become so significant that success would require perfect conditions and extraordinary precision. "Sir, are you asking if I believe a 4,000-meter shot is theoretically possible?" The general shook his head. "No, Sergeant. I'm asking if you're willing to attempt it." The implications of his statement began to dawn on her. This wasn't just a training demonstration anymore. General Blackwood was describing an actual tactical situation that required someone capable of extreme, long-range precision shooting. Her performance today had apparently convinced him that she might possess the skills necessary for an unprecedented military operation. Colonel Rivera looked stunned. "Sir, 4,000 meters is beyond the effective range of any standard military rifle system, which is precisely why conventional military thinking suggests it's impossible," General Blackwood replied. "But Sergeant Chen has already demonstrated capabilities that exceed conventional expectations. The question is whether those capabilities can be extended to meet an operational requirement." Sarah's mind raced through the ballistic calculations involved in a 4,000-meter shot. The technical challenges were staggering but not necessarily insurmountable. With the right equipment, perfect weather conditions, and extensive preparation, it might be theoretically possible, the key word being theoretically. "Sir, such a shot would require specialized ammunition, modified equipment, and environmental conditions that might occur only rarely," she said carefully. "All of those factors can be provided," the general replied. "The question is whether you're willing to attempt something that has never been successfully accomplished in military history." The weight of his words settled over the assembled group. Sarah realized that her morning demonstration had evolved into something far more significant than she had imagined. General Blackwood wasn't just testing her abilities anymore. He was recruiting her for a mission that would push the boundaries of what was considered possible in military operations. As storm clouds continued gathering overhead and the first drops of rain began to fall, Sarah looked toward the distant mountains where such a shot would need to take place. Somewhere in that rugged terrain, an enemy target waited, protected by distance and terrain that conventional weapons couldn't overcome. The general was offering her the opportunity to attempt something unprecedented, something that would either establish her as one of the most capable marksmen in military history or demonstrate the absolute limits of individual precision shooting. Either way, her answer would determine not only her own future, but potentially the success of a critical military operation. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself positioned on a rocky outcrop at dawn, 4,087 meters from her target, according to the laser rangefinder. The intervening weeks had been a blur of intensive preparation, specialized equipment acquisition, and detailed mission planning. General Blackwood had not been exaggerating when he said this operation would push the boundaries of military capability. The rifle in her hands was unlike anything she had used before. Built specifically for extreme long-range applications, it featured a custom barrel, specialized optics, and ammunition designed to maintain velocity and accuracy at unprecedented distances. Every component had been selected and calibrated for this single mission. Weather conditions had been monitored continuously for 10 days, waiting for the perfect atmospheric window. Today offered what meteorologists described as ideal conditions: minimal wind, stable atmospheric pressure, and clear visibility that would allow Sarah to see her target through the powerful spotting scope positioned beside her. Through the scope, the target building appeared as a small rectangular shape nestled in a valley between two peaks. Intelligence reports confirmed that the high-value target maintained a predictable routine, appearing at a specific window each morning at precisely 06:47 hours for approximately 90 seconds. This narrow time window represented Sarah's only opportunity for the shot. Major Thompson, the mission spotter assigned to assist her, made final adjustments to the meteorological equipment that would provide real-time atmospheric data. "Wind speed is steady at 4 miles per hour from the east," he reported quietly. "Temperature is 52 degrees, humidity at 37%, atmospheric pressure steady at 2985. Sarah nodded as she worked through the complex ballistic calculations one final time. At 4,087 meters, bullet drop would be 127 feet below her point of aim. Flight time would be 5.8 seconds, during which any change in conditions could cause a miss. Wind drift, though minimal today, would still push the bullet nearly 3 feet to the left of her aim point. The mathematics involved were staggering. She was essentially attempting to hit a target the size of a dinner plate from nearly 2.5 miles away, accounting for dozens of variables that would affect bullet trajectory. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. General Blackwood's voice crackled through her earpiece from the command post 2 miles behind her position. "Overwatch, this is command. Target window opens in 60 seconds. Sarah settled into her shooting position, her body conforming to the rocky surface in a way that would remain stable throughout the extended aiming process. Her breathing routine began automatically, the deep, measured respirations that would optimize her nervous system for the precision required. Through her scope, she could see the target window clearly now, a dark opening in the building's wall where intelligence indicated her target would appear. The crosshairs were positioned 127 feet above and 3 feet to the right of the window, accounting for bullet drop and wind drift over the enormous distance. 30 seconds to target window, Major Thompson announced. Sarah's world narrowed to the view through her scope, the feel of the rifle against her shoulder, and the rhythmic sound of her controlled breathing. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could completely eliminate the magnitude of what she was attempting. The target appeared exactly on schedule, a human figure silhouetted briefly in the window. Sarah had less than 90 seconds to make final adjustments, account for any last-minute changes in conditions, and execute a shot that would either succeed spectacularly or miss by dozens of feet. Her final scope adjustment was minimal, a tiny correction based on a slight shift in wind direction detected by the meteorological sensors. The trigger squeeze began slowly, applying pressure gradually while maintaining perfect sight alignment, despite the target being completely invisible below her aimed point. The rifle discharged with tremendous force, the specially loaded cartridge propelling the match-grade bullet downrange at over 2,800 feet per second. Through her scope, Sarah watched the vapor trail arc across the valley, a faint disturbance in the morning air that traced the projectile's path toward the distant target. Time seemed suspended as the bullet flew through its lengthy trajectory. Sarah maintained her shooting position, continuing to observe through the scope, while Major Thompson monitored radio communications for confirmation of impact. 5.8 seconds after the shot, the radio exploded with activity. "Confirm hit!" came the excited voice of the forward observer positioned on an adjacent peak. "Direct hit target down!" Sarah remained motionless for several seconds, processing the reality of what had just occurred. She had successfully executed a shot that military experts had considered theoretically impossible under field conditions. The bullet had traveled nearly 2.5 miles, dropped over 127 feet, and still found its target with lethal precision. Major Thompson was grinning as he monitored the radio traffic. "Outstanding shot, Sergeant. Forward observers confirmed direct hit at 4,087 meters. That's got to be some kind of record." General Blackwood's voice returned to Sarah's earpiece, but his tone was completely different from their first meeting weeks earlier. "Overwatch, this is command. Exceptional work, Sergeant. Mission accomplished." The journey back to base took 3 hours through mountainous terrain, but Sarah barely noticed the difficult hiking conditions. Her mind was still processing the technical achievement of the shot and its implications for future military operations. She had proven that individual precision shooting could accomplish objectives that conventional weapon systems could not. When they finally reached the base, word of the successful mission had already spread throughout the installation. Sarah found herself surrounded by personnel who wanted to congratulate her and learn details about the shot. But the most significant encounter came when General Blackwood approached her at the equipment cleaning station. "Sergeant Chen," he said, his voice carrying a respect that had been completely absent during their first meeting. "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked up from cleaning her rifle, surprised by the general's directness. 3 weeks ago, I made assumptions about your capabilities based on factors that had nothing to do with your actual skills," he continued. "I've spent 30 years in the military, and I've never witnessed shooting of this caliber. What you accomplished today will be studied in military academies for generations." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This was not merely professional courtesy. It was genuine recognition from someone who understood the magnitude of what had been achieved. "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate these capabilities in an operational environment." General Blackwood shook his head. "Sergeant, you did far more than demonstrate capabilities. You expanded the realm of what we consider tactically possible. Military doctrine will need to be rewritten to account for precision shooting at these ranges." Colonel Rivera joined them, carrying a folder thick with paperwork. "Sir, I've prepared the after-action reports and recommendation documents. This mission will definitely require detailed analysis at the highest levels of command." The general nodded. "Colonel, I want Sergeant Chen's techniques documented thoroughly. We need to establish training protocols that might allow other marksmen to develop similar capabilities. This cannot remain a one-person skill set." Over the following days, Sarah found herself at the center of extensive debriefing sessions with intelligence officers, ballistics experts, and senior military officials. Her shooting techniques were analyzed frame by frame through high-speed cameras. Her equipment modifications were studied and replicated. Her calculation methods were documented and distributed to sniper schools throughout the military. But perhaps the most significant change was in General Blackwood himself. During a ceremony 3 weeks later, where Sarah received commendations for her extraordinary shooting, the general delivered remarks that would be remembered throughout the military community. "Today, we honor Sergeant Chen for accomplishing something that redefines military capability," he announced to the assembled personnel. "But we should also remember that exceptional ability can sometimes be found in unexpected places. Our job as leaders is to recognize that potential, nurture it, and provide opportunities for it to flourish." He paused, looking directly at Sarah. 3 weeks ago, I nearly dismissed one of the most capable marksmen I have ever encountered because I allowed preconceptions to override objective evaluation. That mistake could have cost us a critical mission and deprived the military of extraordinary capability. The general's speech became required reading in leadership courses throughout the military, serving as a powerful reminder about the dangers of assumptions and the importance of evaluating personnel based on actual performance, rather than superficial characteristics. Sarah's achievement opened doors not only for herself, but for countless other women in specialized military roles. Training programs were expanded. Equipment was redesigned to accommodate different physical characteristics, and evaluation criteria were adjusted to focus on results rather than traditional expectations. The 4,087-meter shot became legendary within military circles, but Sarah understood that its true significance lay not in the technical achievement itself, but in what it represented about human potential when given proper support and opportunity. Years later, when asked about that morning in the mountains, Sarah would always emphasize that the shot was successful because of preparation, training, and favorable conditions rather than any sort of miraculous ability. But those who witnessed the mission understood that they had seen something extraordinary. The moment when preconceptions gave way to reality, when someone everyone had underestimated proved that exceptional performance knows no boundaries. General Blackwood, who went on to champion expanded opportunities for women in combat roles, never forgot the lesson he learned that day. Sometimes, the most powerful weapon in any military arsenal is an open mind willing to recognize ability wherever it might be found. And sometimes, the person everyone laughs at turns out to be exactly the person you need when everything else seems impossible.